Today's episode is presented by Lodestar, the fee experts.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Lending Leaders. We have a great guest today, Kevin Foley, Director of Product Management at Optimal Blue, fellow toddler dad, fellow New Englander. So a lot of things to talk about, although I'm out of New England now and you moved to New England, so we kind of swapped places. But Kevin, thanks so much for joining. Fellow podcaster too. So we got a lot of things to talk about in just a little bit of time here.
Yeah, happy to be here, Jim. Super excited to talk to you guys and join you here. And a lot of big news in New England. We had Stefan Diggs sign. We were just talking about that. So we got some glimmers of hope for NFL season.
We will see, and then a good draft pick to boot. So hopefully they get someone to protect the quarterback long enough to actually get the ball out this time. So we will
Progress.
see.
Baby steps.
Exactly. So speaking of baby steps, how'd you get to mortgage technology?
Yeah, well, so kind of like any, young child, I always dreamed of growing up and being in mortgages. It was actually sort of, like most people, kind of stumbled backwards into it. When I was about to graduate school, I actually had a position to go teach English in Korea. That was my plan. And, kind of decided at the last minute, I kind of got cold feet, I guess, and, decided I wanted to, stay stateside and ended up getting a temp job at a lender. And I was actually the guy this was like during the Great Recession times. But I was a guy who was helping digitize mortgages. So I would come in and I would scan files and then they would become digital files. And I was very grateful that someone at some point said, hey, this guy with a college degree, maybe he's a little more qualified, and we give him a shot somewhere else in the company. And so I got my my first kind of real job in capital markets. That was at Embrace Home Loans. So that's kind of where I started, and I figured I'd just sort of make that my area of focus and study. And I did the chartered financial analyst exams. And I've got my CFA designation. Just was focused in the areas of hedging, but also helping implement technology. And then ended up joining with Compass Analytics, which Embrace Home Loans was implementing Compass Analytics. I was main point of contact for that, and that's how I switched over to the vendor side. And believe it or not, I actually haven't changed anything about my career since then. We've had a few acquisitions over the last 5 or 6 years, and gone from Compass Analytics to Black Knight, and eventually over here to Optimal Blue, which has been such a blessing to be here, and I've learned so much along the way, which has been great. So a little bit about my story, but it's like anyone else, right? It's no one grows up planning to be in mortgages. It always just sort of ends up happening that way.
No, I see some comparisons with mine. I actually spent a summer teaching English in China, in Beijing.
Oh wow!
It was what Lodestar was kind of a side project, a side gig for me at the time, and that paid for the trip. Before it was called Lodestar, the first iteration of the system, paid for that trip. And then until then, at a family title company, I'd been moving boxes. So I wasn't scanning paper files. I was moving them from the office to a U-Haul truck to a storage facility.
Nice.
And then there was a problem. They're like, "Hey, you're an engineer. Can you code this for us?" So that was some
man. So you've done it
there.
all, man. So yeah, we'll need to connect later about the teaching abroad thing. So I can figure out what I missed.
It was really cool. No, happy awesome. To chat about that. Or when I'm on your podcast eventually too.
Yes.
Story, so.
All right. Topic number one.
I'll let you ask me about what my dream English teaching job I had to turn down was. So
okay.
That'll be your question for the podcast. So perfect. For the users trying to find, or the listeners trying to find it. So with Optimal Blue, everyone knows Optimal Blue, ton of clients. How do you balance customization for a client versus what folks need to do at scale for the number of clients you're dealing with, volume you're dealing with? It seems like it's always a push-pull.
Yeah. So, well, it's interesting, with my experience, I think I've been blessed to kind of see both sides of things. I've been more in the startup world. I was the lead product manager for the Compass Analytics PPE and helped sort of, build that from the ground up. And, now I've, switched over to being, part of the dominant market player, and, joining Optimal Blue kind of at their apex and continuing to grow from there. And I think the thing that strikes me about it is there's really a lot of similarities. You're at the end of the day, you're really just trying to solve problems for lenders. But there are, I think, some differences when you're thinking about how do we build things at scale. First, kind of during the development process, you just have so many more people to keep on the same page. Like, we have multiple development teams that all need to be moving in the same direction. They need to understand what the source of truth is. So there's a need for more artifacts throughout that process, kind of keeping everybody aligned. Also, during the pre-release process, there's a big focus on training and education. It's a lot different conversation when you're training or you're trying to educate a group of 50 lenders versus 1,000 lenders. Making sure that all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed. There's a lot that goes into that. But another thing that we've pioneered during my time here at Optimal Blue is our beta periods, which have actually been a really big success for us. So when we're getting ready to release a bigger feature, we open it up to beta participants to come in and test and provide us feedback before it actually, rolls out. And, for instance, we just rolled out a feature called Originator Assistant, and that was at our user conference in February. And Originator Assistant provides AI-based recommendations to adjust the loan scenario and improve pricing. But during our beta period for this, even before rolling it out, we've had over 10,000 base AI or 10,000 AI-based pricing recommendations. So. I think the strategy for us has really been tapping into the scale of our network to be able to make sure that when we roll something out, it's rock solid.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I have my clients certain clients I always like to ask new things. Mainly, they're actually the ones who say no usually, or have figured out the problem in a different way. Because it just gives me a lot of information and avoids us going down a path we shouldn't. So how is any lender able to be a beta client? I think this kind of goes into one of our other talking points. So curious to see what it looks like for who those folks are.
Yeah, I mean, it'll sort of depend on the feature, but more or less, we try and keep the net as wide as possible. And who you might be using as an LOS provider. If we have LOS specific capabilities, then obviously that's going to naturally limit the group. But yeah, we try and cast a very wide net there, and it gives the lender an opportunity to go in and test things, but it's really feedback for us as well. And we have kind of a whole slew of like intelligence gathering capabilities I would characterize that we can see how people are using the system, and even if they're not actively telling things to us, we're gathering information about how they're using it and helping make the system better.
So you had talked about, you went to ICE and you posted on LinkedIn, kind of a sense of urgency from lenders and wanting them to feel more collaborative with their vendors. Obviously, being beta users, giving input on the solution is a great way of doing that. Where do you think that sense of urgency is coming from? Like, what's your vibe right on the industry coming out of Las Vegas?
Yeah, so I did post about that. I feel like I am feeling more of a sense of urgency from lenders, this year compared to previous years. I think it has a lot to do with just the state of the market. There's a heightened focus on, not just, fighting for the volume that's out there, but also making sure that volume is profitable. For a lender. And so there's a probably much more increased scrutiny around their own profitability that's happening. But I actually think it's kind of a great thing. And I think that, lenders should really constantly be thinking about their ROI with their vendor partners. And, at the end of the day, whether, we don't think about ourselves this way, but, at some level, we're kind of line items within a budget, for a lender. And obviously, again, we think we have much more to offer than that, but someone's going to look at us that way. And we got to make sure that we're providing our value. And, if we take that perspective with everything we do, I think it's really kind of a no brainer, for the lender. So, but, I think to kind of, bring it back to your question, I think the onus is much more on the vendor to provide lenders with information how they're delivering ROI. So, like for instance, one of the big things that we're currently communicating is additional ROI at no cost. We just launched 7 new products at our user conference back in February. All of them available at no additional cost for our lenders. So that's something we're really excited about. But I don't think we should shy away from customers feeling a sense of urgency or anything like that. I think it's something that we're focused on every day.
And the urgency comes from we need to get our costs down as fast as possible, right?
Yeah.
It's not like rates are lowering, we need to get ready operationally. It's no, like we are fighting this wave of rising costs and we need to stay ahead of it.
I think that the cost component is a big component of it, and I think it's also just kind of making sure that they're everything that they're doing. I think there's a level of sort of reevaluation, like are we on the right track? How do we get how do we get our to a point where we feel comfortable in terms of our level of volume. The vendor piece is a huge component of that, but I think it's like it's a company wide sense where folks are just trying to make sure that they're going to be best prepared to if rates stay this way, which I think everyone's sort of had some level of acceptance that they're going to stay this way, then
100%.
We got to make it work now. There's no wait it out. We got to make it work now.
Yeah. That was one thing that my team said coming out of conferences is like the people still here have figured it out. Like if you can't find a way to make money in this industry at this point, it's, you consolidate, you sell, you do something like that. But we're kind of like, coming into the survivors a little bit with this period of time.
For sure.
Great. So who knew? 2 folks who are used to hosting podcasts had a lot to talk about. We always like to ask all of our guests a final question what is your lodestar? So we like to celebrate what drives people. Lodestar is someone's guiding star. What gets you up and excited every morning working with this? Trying to schedule calls during your kids' nap times. So what motivates you to do this work?
Yeah, I think something particularly lately that's been driving a lot of my interest and focus is just thinking about the scale of change that's happening right now with technology. And just about like what are things going to look like in 5 years from now? A bit of a futurist maybe I would say, and trying to also keep tabs on what those insights are and bring those insights to the lender community. I like to post about some of the latest AI news on LinkedIn and just things that I think people should be aware of. And just you look at the period that we're in, and I really I draw a lot of parallels between some of the big technological shifts over the past 50 years or so. Like most recent one being the proliferation of mobile, and so the iPhone came out in like 2007, but it wasn't really until I would say more like 2010 2011 where you really started to understand like, oh, everything is apps now, and all these businesses jumping in there and trying to get everything to fit within a phone, and just the opportunity that exists there. And I feel like we're really in one of those positions right now with AI where even less people were sort of less anticipating this than they did, smartphones. It just sort of came out of nowhere. Like all of a sudden we have ChatGPT now, and we can, we can do so much with it. And then from there, it's become exponentially more, capable. And even in the last 3 months, just in 2025, we've had DeepSeek, which completely changed the game in terms of cost efficiency for running models. We've had deep research, which is, a new capability from ChatGPT that can, write research reports at the level of, a PhD. And then we've had agents, AI agents, which I think maybe even the biggest new capability yet, and may completely change how we interact with B2B software. I love thinking about that stuff, talking about it, and I really see that as guiding a lot of some of our strategy here at Optimal Blue. Is we want to stay on top of the latest insights, and then also help be ambassadors, technological ambassadors for our customers, so that they understand kind of what's coming, what the value is, and encourage them to incrementally adopt some of those new tech capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much opportunity, but so much risk, right? I was at a conference in Dallas, and it was a lender. Lenders were talking amongst themselves, and one lender said, have your team use ChatGPT to ask underwriter questions. of ChatGPT, not your underwriter.
Right.
I'm like, great. But like, I even raised my hand. I was like, hey, make sure you're paying for a subscription. Okay. So like all of your data,
Right,
like,
yeah,
you gotta be careful. Like it's not a bad idea in theory, but like, there's a lot of risk out here. Right. And like everyone was like jotting it down because they had no idea that was even something as simple as that.
You're really highlighting the need for technological ambassadors. Was
that the only millennial in that room? One of like two. So like it's,
I know. Yeah. And it's one of those things where, I wouldn't expect lenders to, understand some of the latest stuff that's come out in such a deep it's so new and it's so different than what we've been focused on historically that you really it takes conversations with folks who are enmeshed in this area, I think, to really both understand the value, the risk, to your point, and then how to go about adopting and implementing something.
I think that it makes a ton of sense for someone like yourself and Optimal Blue being that trusted partner, right, for folks as they embrace on AI with pricing and underwriting and all the other things where it can and will help your business.
Absolutely.
Kevin, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Sounds great.
Have a good one.